Hello, folks. Good afternoon. I'm sure you've looked at the recent headlines, such as we're looking at right now, and looking at the number one problem that faces the United States right now. And of course, I don't mean COVID-19, I mean the lack of toilet paper. It is a failure of the marketing channels. No, actually it isn't. But it is kind of interesting that it kind of dovetails with this chapter, and we're getting a classic discussion of just how important marketing channels are. So, what I'm going to discuss is we're going to talk about marketing channels, and we're not talking about supply chain. And we're going to make a distinction there, and you're going to understand it whenever anyone talks about supply chain. But before that goes on, I'll give you a little history of where I was going. I worked in retail, I don't know, maybe 25, 30 years of my life. Went to go get my, I used to be also in IT, and any of those of you know when you get into your 40s, you get aged out when you're in IT. Well, I decided I wanted to go back and do something I really enjoyed, and I wanted to go back to college. Between my MBA and then getting my PhD, at the first year that I was getting my PhD, I really wanted to specialize in marketing channels. I'd been in retail, I enjoyed channels, I understood it, I was a salesperson, but when I went in, I found that the vast majority of what was being studied in marketing was either consumer behavior or sales, but very little that had to do with that. Excuse me, also communication, but or integrated marketing communication. But the interesting enough, communication and that can actually be in another different department. And so I tried to get my PhD in that particular subject as channels as a secondary thing to study. But at Louisiana Tech, they had no supply chain at all. So it was really discouraging. So I did a study for the very first conference that I went to, and I wrote this particular article that you see right here, and I called it Opening Channels of Thought, Understanding the Value of Place. And so what this article was it's just a thought piece, okay? This was a thought piece I did in, let me think, it was the spring of 2009, all right? And so what this article was about is why was marketing abandoning the channels as a concept. And so what I did was kind of raise the possibility that place still has a place. And so I came up with what I call is the place value theory. But I talked about the history of channels and the history of marketing and why channels is so important to marketing. When you consider it, I mean, from the very beginning, think about how many goods, even 100 years ago, that were delivered to you. My grandfather can remember having the paper delivered to him, the milk delivered to him, eggs delivered to him, ice delivered to him, bread delivered to him, and he was having those things delivered daily. And yet, the basic perception is that home delivery is something of a relatively new thing. Well, what I talked about was I traced through the value of place or channels in the 4 Ps, and what I showed is that there was a general lack of interest in Ps as well. So what I did was I did this collection. I went through ABI Inform abstracts right here, and I looked at, I think it's 300 selected marketing journals, and I typed in the word channels. And I found that the word channels was 43rd in the most frequent word with 338 uses, with consumer ranking first, okay, 3,000. Then product was third, then promotion was listed 6th, and price was listed 8th. And so, what it basically stated is that in terms of the 4 Ps, channels was completely out. And then if you were to type in the word place or location, it was not even listed at all in the top 358. And so my point is what is the reason for the de-emphasis of channels? And it wasn't necessarily that I consider that it was a de-emphasis, but that price and, promotion and product had been done to death. But I still felt that place had a place. And so that's what my thought was in. And what I said also is that the concept of channels of distribution or place comes from our original roots. Marketing's original roots were in economics. And so we tend to have economic definitions like utility, which does not have the same impact that value does. Value is a more apropos definition instead of utility, because utility thinks of what we consider to be pragmatic pluses and minuses, where value takes in the whole minus what you have to give up. And so that's what I'm arguing here. The difficulty with definitions provided is that utility is not a marketing concept. It is an economic one. Utility is defined as the usefulness of a good or state of something being useful. And so that's, again, once again, the AMA took the definition from a purely economic one as well. Long story getting longer. Sorry, I'm very passionate about this. My point is that place has a place in marketing and that it is important. What a difference a decade makes, okay? I am not only just talking about this, and this is the classic example of where the pull of consumers changes everything, but it once again reemphasizes or puts a capstone on the on this, oh gosh, what would I say, this evolution over the last decade, a redefinition of what channels are in marketing. And so the best example I can give to you, and I'll talk about, is the Omni-Channel now. Okay, and it is a cross-channel strategy that is used now that pretty much takes all the channels and binds them together. And so I'm very, very gung-ho on this, and I want you to understand the difference. But just to give you an idea of me, I teach channels now in undergraduate. I have 3 classes. I teach 1 prep, 3 classes, and they're full and they're brimming to the top. And we at App State have both undergraduate degree and a graduate degree in supply chain, and they're jam-packed. Like I said, what a difference a decade makes. Okay, you're tired of listening to me. All right, let's go on and talk about marketing channels. And I'm going to define why channels is different. Okay, so let's go to the definition. All right, it's important to understand that marketing channels are a set or a series of interdependent organizations that participate in the process of making a product or service available for use or consumption. And it is important to understand that intermediaries are important and that you understand the players in the game itself, all right? Generally, channels can have as few as 0 channels at all. In other words, it's directly from manufacturer to consumer. You can have a distributor in there. You can have a wholesaler and retailer. In the Far East, in Asia, they can have 6 and 7 layers. And that's possible. In the United States, we have 4 or 5 layers, depending on the specialty. It is what makes it so efficient is how we go about designing it. Okay? Now, the overall channels that a firm employs, and it is important to understand that a company can employ more than one, is what's known as a marketing channel system. And that is all of those channels that a particular company might employ. It's also important to understand is that these are strategies, and it also depends on whether or not you're going to use a pull or a push strategy to deliver your goods to the consumer. So what's the difference? All right, on a push spit it out, Dave. On a push strategy, the company uses its own manufacturer's sales force. It uses production money. It uses all of these means to introduce and induce the downstream partners to push this particular good. And so what happens is that the good is pushed through the system. A pull strategy is where the manufacturer goes directly to the consumer and creates demand, and because the consumer is interested and wants it, the consumer pulls the goods through the system. All right? And so that is what a push strategy is. A push strategy takes the manufacturer's assets, salespeople, promotion, all of those things, gets it to the distributors send it to the retailers, and then the retailers send it out to the consumer. Whereas the pull strategy, what happens is the manufacturer signals to the consumer, creates interest and demand, and the consumer pulls it through the system. All right? Is there any one corporation that does one versus the next? No, not really. Because you can do both, and because depending on which promotion strategy you use, one you would use personal selling, and another one you would use mass effects such as television. You have two different medias that you would use when you're trying to pursue either strategy. Okay? All right. Now, as I've talked about those multi-marketing channel systems, I also want to talk about the concept of what's known as the multi-channel. All right. So, how many of you not only have gone into the Walmart or have perhaps ordered something online? That, in essence, is an example of the multi-channel. So, with the multi-channel, what it basically means is that I, as a consumer, could get my goods in multiple different ways to be delivered to me. And it all depends on which I consider more. All right. If you look at Walmart now, you can go into the store and buy it yourself. You can order it online, go inside the store and pick it up. You can go to the store and stop in a given location, and they will put the goods in your car. Or you can just go online, order it, and it's delivered to you. This is an example of what the multi-channel is. Okay. Now, what the Omni-Channel does that is quite different is the Omni-Channel uses this little device called your cell phone, and it ties all of those together into one seamless example of shopping. Okay, and so if I had the Walmart on here, I could go to the Walmart channel, I could shop on the channel itself, and then I could decide how I want those goods delivered. And so that is an example of multi-channel and omni-channel. And both of them are extremely successful. And they are definitely the wave of the future. And this is the reason why my classes are stacked to the ceiling. Okay? All right. Now, I want to just do one more thing to kind of, emphasize why we call this, or why I would call it, the value network or the demand channel. Okay? So, I want you to think of a standard marketing channel system. Let's just look at the consumer channel here. All right? We have a manufacturer at the top. We have a wholesaler who basically consolidates all of the goods together. You may even, let me switch over to here, those go directly to a retailer, and then eventually those goods go to the consumer. The difference, big folks test question, I want you to remember this one. The difference between supply chain and marketing channels is that marketing considers the consumer to be part of the channel system. Got that? We believe that the consumer is part of the marketing channel system. Why? Because they perform channel functions. That's all you'd have to write down. The consumer is considered a member of the marketing channel, which they are not in supply chain, because they perform channel functions. So what do I mean? Let's go back to everybody's favorite example, toilet paper, okay? So, if I were to go to, let's say, a Walgreens, because that's probably a good one. Walgreens is a convenience store, will probably have toilet paper there, but they may have it a little bit more because convenience is more important there. And because it's convenience, you're just simply going to pick it up, and you may pay 30 cents more, but you're actually spending less money than if you were to perhaps go somewhere else. So generally, you would spend more. Now, let's talk about if you go to Costco. And at Costco, instead of getting 2 rolls, you get 200 because that's how they're packaged. Now, you get a substantial discount on that. Why? Well, the reason is you're going to perform the channel function of what's called breaking bulk. You are going to separate all of those rolls of toilet paper and break them down and then store them for inventory, just like you were a retail outlet. And so because of that, and because you perform channel functions, you get a break consistent with what would be called the normative profit share. You don't have to know that, okay? But it basically means this, is we give a break on those things because you perform the functions themselves. All right? Okay, so I wanted you now to understand that. And I also want you to understand now, with this overwhelming demand and the fact that consumers usually consume 40% more of things if they're at home versus in the daily workday, it can give you an idea what's happening with the toilet paper right now, okay? The fact is, quite simply, is that you're consuming 40% more. What it also means this is that, let's say any one you want in terms of toilet paper, you have 2 basic channels. You have the consumer channel, and usually those are in smaller individual lots, and then you have the commercial channel that you're selling toilet paper to, and you're selling boxes in lots of, who knows, of a gross 144 at a time. Who knows how much? But if I'm going to ship toilet paper to, let's say, a GM plant, I'm not going to ship it 2 rolls at a time. I'm going to ship it by thousands and thousands. And quite simply, what's happened is the normal use of toilet paper that was being done in commercial systems, all those individuals are now at the retail right now, and it's very difficult to shift those things around. It is. And so that's why we're in a shortages right now. The channels will figure it out. This is also one of the difficulties with channels. It's known as performance ambiguity. Quite simply, the left hand, which is the manufacturer, doesn't know what the right hand is doing. And so what happens is they're grabbing all of these goods at one time, and the manufacturer is just going along, and all of a sudden there's a big shortage, and the big shortage not only happens in one location, but it happens to thousands of locations. It means all of those thousands of locations ramp up their orders all at one time. It means that what was commercially in the channel system immediately shrinks down, and it means the manufacturer has to do his best to way over increase production as much as he can. This is an example of what's known as the bullwhip effect, okay? That a small change here, by the time it gets to the end of the channel system where the manufacturer is, it comes up and makes a large problem, okay? All right, so let's go on. I could talk about it all day. Okay. So as I've said, the digital revolution has really profoundly changed everything. In the Omni-Channel, a customer can do support, he can order online, she can check out online for a product to see if it's available in the store. You could order it on your phone and go pick it up in the store, and you can also return the product purchased online to a nearby store. All of those with the digital revolution, this is an example of the Omni-Channel. And I kind of want to stress that again, okay? That Omni-Channel basically takes all of those channels and does what it can to blend them in seamlessly to the consumer, okay? Now, one more thing about the Omni-Channel I'm going to go on. The Omni-Channel is not consumer-driven. It was consumer inspired. Consumers are the ones who started this revolution. And if we are true to what Jag Chef says, is that marketing is context driven, we run with that context driven at the same time, or otherwise we're left behind. All right. So what do marketing channels do? Well, they overcome the difficulty of time. And so what it means is that you can have the goods exactly at the moment you need it, when the supplies are in correct place. You could have them at the right place at any time that you generally need it, once again in a normal situation. And it also means that you can have possessions of the goods for those who need them and when they are wanted, and that is important. Okay, so what are the different levels that are in the channels? Well, we're going to talk about the three basic ones for you to understand. So the zero channel is also known as the direct channel. The zero channel basically is when the manufacturer talks directly to the consumer. You have this straight one-on-one relationship with the consumer, and it is a constant interacting one. You have a direct idea of what they want, and then you're able to deliver to them. All right? What we look on as a channel, a normal channel system, can be anywhere from 1 to 2 to 3 levels, and that all that has to do with is the number of intermediaries in the system. All right. Now, it's not unusual to see this 2-level system. As a matter of fact, it's quite common. Why do you add a wholesaler there in the first place? Wholesalers provide very valuable service. As a matter of fact, you could say that service is everything that a wholesaler is about, even though they have goods. Successful wholesalers, ones that are called master distributors, generally are also experts in a very unique industry. I'm going to just show you this because I think it's kind of one of those things to give you an idea. There was one that I worked with when I was working offshore, and it's a company by the name of Moody Price. And Moody Price is a wholesaler, and it's a gigantic one as well. Moody Price sells stainless steel fittings. All right? Now, why would you need stainless steel fittings or stainless steel tubing? Well, look where those are basically clustered, and think about what kind of steel holds up under the conditions of the Gulf Coast. It'll give you an idea of how specialized that is. Now, I worked with them when I was at a retail outlet. They sold to us, and we sold to people like Diamond Offshore and places like that. But they were a central area. They, in essence, were able to be a depository for any of these brands up here. We didn't necessarily have to be experts on them, but they could be. And it was a very synergistic kind of relationship. But notice also, it's more than just that they sell goods. They specialize in those particular goods. Does anybody does anybody have any confidence that they know how to handle high pressure? I mean, does anybody have the kind of wherewithal to handle 40,000 psi high pressure portable test systems? I don't, but they are experts and they understand it. And so those are the purposes of intermediaries like this. They can be generalists, they can know a lot of things, but they can also be specialists as well. And the specialists that have that unique service are the ones that really do well. Now think about also this, the generalists are also specialists too. To give you an example. Hey folks, glitch in the matrix. Had to go take care of my little girl. Okay.
Can you turn on the AC, the cooler in Mommy's room? I'm hot in there.
Honey, I can't turn on the fan. All right, now, honey, let me finish, please. Okay.
Okay.
Another glitch in the matrix. God bless our children. Okay, so I had finished with waiting and desired delivery time. The next is spatial convenience, and that is basically how easy it makes, or how easy the channel makes it for consumers to purchase a product. And what that means is quite simply is its particular convenience. And of course, much of that is tied up with which product category it is. Remember, we have a category that's called convenience items. And so how easy it is depends very much on what kind of product that it is. The product variety is basically the assortment that the marketing channel will provide. And normally customers like or prefer a greater assortment. And that has to do basically with they want as many as they can handle. All right. And so if you look at a convenience store, all right, convenience store, the number of different unique items is a very fine-tuned mix. And they don't want to have too many of a particular item. An example would be, like a Kit Kat bar, all right? You will see Kit Kats probably in 3 or 4 varieties. But if they were to take in 8 to 10 varieties, quite simply, they would overwhelm you. And then the last is service backup. And this is the add-on services such as credit, delivery, installation, repairs that the channel provides. This was my present to myself for tenure. I bought a 75-inch television and got my wife to say yes before she ever saw how big it was. All right. And her first 2 words started with holy. One of the reasons why I bought it, ironically, from Walmart was quite simply is that Walmart would come to my door, ship it to my door, and bring it inside. And because of that one particular thing, that's the reason why I bought it from them. Okay? All right, so we have all of these unique parts about the channel. It's important that when you are developing your system, it's extremely important to establish the objectives and the constraints of whatever kind of channels that you are creating. Are you trying to create some kind of uniqueness and speciality? Then you're going to want to have stores, but you're going to want to have special stores. Now this picture is of an Apple store. And let me tell you something. When Apple opened their stores, and they still do, Apple stores, look how big that is, have a higher per square inch revenue than any other retail outlet in the world, and that includes diamond shops. All right, so that'll give you an idea of what kind of money's flying between those 2 doors. And Apple, to thank their employees, pays them salary. Okay, so how special do you want it to be? We're lucky that we have an IKEA that is in Charlotte. There are only 51 IKEAs in the United States. Compare that to the 4,700 different numbers of Walmarts in the United States. Both of those are decisions that are balancing the objectives of those corporations, and they're meeting them and exceeding them. Okay? So, when you're designing your channels, what you're designing first is the types of intermediaries you're going to have, the number of intermediaries you're going to have, and the responsibility of each of the individual channel members. And so the type of intermediaries means exactly that. How many different levels do you want to go? All right. Now, let me also say that is for each channel, from Salesforce to distributors, how far you want that channel to be. All right. Because every one of those has its own strengths and weaknesses. Okay. So, the decision on the number of intermediaries. Isn't that interesting that they have a steel there and you happen to have one of your cases to choose which one that is? I would think the case that you're going to look at, you're going to want to think about channels when you're considering this, because the types of distribution have a lot to do with the brand identity of a particular unit. Okay? And so we have a number of intermediaries here. We have what is called exclusive distribution, which severely limits the number of intermediaries, and I certainly think that I could say IKEA is one of that group. Selective distribution relies only on some of the intermediaries willing to carry a product, okay? It doesn't necessarily worry about having too many, and that it's willing to have more than one. However, selective does mean that it has some kind of criteria when it comes to distributing their goods. And the last is intensive distribution, where basically it means that it is wherever you want to be able to. You want to have it in as many outlets as possible. Now, we're going to talk about conflict in a minute, but I want to basically state something here. If manufacturers could, they would sell them in as many outlets as they possibly could to the point they saturate the market. Because for them, success means selling as many as they possibly can. For a distributor or for a retailer, they would want to have exclusive distribution because they want to be able to sell as many of those individual units in that given trading area, okay? And so what we have here is a natural conflict, and it has to do with conflicting goals, all right? And that is one of the areas in which conflict exists, and I just wanted to mention that to you, okay? Let's move right on to that. I don't want to care about the terms and responsibilities of channel members right now, but I would want to talk about power. Now, folks, power is one of the major driving, things that you write about when you're talking about channels, for decades, okay? In the 90s, every paper that was written about channels was written about power. Power was in everything, all right? Power actually comes from leadership psychology when you're talking about individuals, but we find that institutions exert power as well. And power basically is the ability to influence a member to do something that you desire against their own wishes, okay? And so when we look at power, we're looking at an important force, especially when the change is good for an entire group. So when Walmart in the 90s started reimagining their vendor system, the VRS, the vendor replenishment system, one of the things that they absolutely demanded is that if you're a vendor of Walmart, you must invest in the IT necessary to be able to connect with us in the vendor system. It was a lot of money back then. It was different. It was tough to do, but the vendors did it because Walmart did throw them a carrot along with the stick. Basically what they did was they say, you can see every single item or product that you sell on every shelf in every Walmart in the world. And that was what they got back. Long story getting longer, it was a magnificent, successful strategy for both Walmart and their vendors, and it carries on to this day. The only way Walmart could have done this is through the proper and respectful use of power, and it was successful. Power works when it is the good of the whole system versus the good of one of the members. Okay? All right. So let's talk about each of these powers. Each of these powers is unique, and you can look at them. You got a kind of an idea of what they might mean. Notice the first two, it kind of flips of each other. Okay? And so the first is coercive power, and this is the manufacturer's ability to threaten to withdraw a resource or terminate a relationship if an intermediary fails to cooperate. Okay? This power can be very effective, but it is a last resort, because basically what it means is that all other attempts have failed. Reward power basically says that they give you an extra benefit for performing a specific act. Son, if you do what I want, do your homework, you get a cookie. All right? Every parent knows exactly the danger of that, because the next 2 days, your kid will come in and say, I finished this, where's my cookie? All right? And so reward power has to be used in a very legitimate and a careful way too. Having said legitimate power is basically the power that you have because 2 ways. You have the respect of individuals with each other, and the second is that it is rewarded under contract. Okay? So in other words, it's that basic fact that both sides have signed a contract. It means that there is to be a compliance. All right? The first 3, coercive, reward, and legitimate, are what is known as position power. Position power. Position power basically means by our place in the channel system, we have these particular abilities, and whether or not we exercise them or not is entirely up to us. The last 2 are not position power, they're known as personal power. All right? And so the first is what's known as expert power. And this is where the manufacturer has some special knowledge or idiosyncratic ability that is special that the intermediaries very much value. Many times it is some kind of special, it is some kind of expertise. The difficulty with expert power is that expertise does fade. Companies come along that are better or smarter, or everything changes in the environment, and the change brings about, in effect, new individuals. If you remember back when I talked about innovation and I talked about Schumpeter, innovation is an anthropological word, because innovation means changes, not just in the way we do things, but it changes the people who are at the top. It changes buildings. It changes structure. It changes society. And so when Microsoft had the chance to beat Apple to their own game and come up with their own foldable iPad, they balked at the chance. And that is an example, because what happened is Microsoft operating system went from 96% of all of the devices out there. Now it is less than 40. It's something like 35%. Why? Because they changed the devices. And so now, instead of just only having PCs, we have iPads, we have tablets, we have Android devices, we have all sorts of others. And so expert is a very big power, but it is a power that must be constantly replenished. The last is reward power, and this is a manufacturer that is so highly respected that intermediaries are proud to be associated with it. Steel people who are doing that one, take note, okay? These are companies like IBM, Caterpillar, Hewlett-Packard, although I'm not a fan of HP. I've gone through that. When our company was doing away, this is in the 80s. Yeah, it's a while back. I was a store manager of a computer store, and what we were doing was we were giving up selling K-Pros and Columbia Data Products. Both of those were going out of business, and I argued quite vociferously that we should chase IBM. And so this was early in the game. This was 85. And so I got sent the application, and it was 40 pages long. And I couldn't get everybody to go through it, but it would have been great if we would have done it, because who didn't want those 3 big blue letters on their door? Okay, so this is how we go about motivating those channel members. Remember I said, folks, is that there is a there is a conflict in there. It is built in. You have the conflict from the individuals at the top, or excuse me, the individuals who are manufacturing, and you have conflict individuals who are the retailers. Now, who holds the power now? Well, I would say all of last century, the power was always in the manufacturer. And then in 1995, 96, the Harvard Business Review, Parasimon wrote an article that said the power of the channels is now totally with the retailer because of one. Want to guess who that one was in 1996? It was the company that was building one superstore every 6 weeks, Walmart. All right, and they changed the dynamics of power, and that's why Walmart and Amazon and the distributors are now having all the power. And the other difficulty with that, of course, is substitutability. So we talked about substitutability when we were talking about price. Well, the fact is that substitutability still drives, and the fact that there's so many different alternatives now for distributors, they have the power now too. Now, I'm briefly going to just state that in a conventional system like you see now, a conventional system where you have these multi-layers, each one of these is called a horizontal member, okay? Well, there are circumstances where you have just basically one company that controls everything, and that's what's known as a vertical market, okay? A vertical market system is where the producer, wholesaler, and retailer act as a unified system. One channel member basically owns all of the franchises or all of those and has all of the power that goes all the way down, all right? These are not value-added resellers who are individuals who basically contract with another corporation and act as their agent. These are individuals who actually own everything from beginning to end. You see many vertical markets. We're not going to worry about horizontal marketing. I just want you to remember vertical market from this. And of course, conventional systems are separate. Vertical market is owned from the manufacturer all the way to selling directly to the consumer. You can see corporations like Apple who have a conventional market system right next to a vertical market system, and so you can see Apple stores that own the product all the way down directly to the consumer, and those are examples where they basically stand right next to each other, okay? And so you don't have to have channel coordination. You own the channel. You also see these when they're in highly driven service markets as well. And so IBM, as an example, sold all of their hardware business all the way up to the minis and the mainframes, and they focus directly on software, and they deliver their systems directly now, except for banking systems, I should say. They have intermediaries for that. But they have unique idiosyncratic knowledge that can't directly be transferred to other things, and that's what makes them so powerful, okay? So, there are differences between what are known as brick and click and pure click companies, okay? So e-commerce is just a simple definition. It is another channel member that uses the internet to transact or facilitate the sale of products. A pure click corporation, you can readily accept Amazon up until they started opening stores. A brick and click corporation, of course, is the one like a Walmart that has multiple channels in which they can deliver their goods through. Now, I'm going to move past the mobile commerce because I think you got the idea, so you don't have to talk on that one. But I do want to talk about the last discussion on this is the difficulty that eventually happens, and that is the thought of conflict. Conflict is one of those things that lives and exists in any system. There's nothing you can do about it. As I've said before, if you are working in a marketing channel system, there is a built-in goal incongruity, which means that basically you have the retail outlet has different ambitions than the manufacturers do, and this naturally creates conflict. Okay, conflict is generated when one channel member's actions prevent the other channel member from achieving their goal, and so the manufacturer wants to sell as many as they possibly can. The downstream member or the retailer insists to the manufacturer that we want exclusive distribution rights to this particular territory. And where the conflict occurs is when the manufacturer is not convinced that all the goods they want to sell can be sold to that through that downstream outlet. And so that is an example. All right. Now, what you hope to have is channel cooperation and coordination. And that's when the channels are brought together to advance goals together instead of potentially incompatible ones, where success is the most important thing that both sides desire, and they're driven to do it to whatever possibility they can. Generally, as a rule of thumb, organizations, I cannot answer for whatever organizations you live in, but even with goal congruity, channel members want to get along. They want to succeed together, and given half the reason why, hopefully they can find some way of cooperating. However, you do find conflict. Horizontal conflict occurs between channel members at the same level. Okay, and so what happens is I have a distributor over here of a given product, and there's another distributor of that same product in the same area, and he's trying to basically distribute at the same time. And so that's horizontal channel conflict. Vertical channel conflict is what we talk about when we talk about goal incongruity. That is between different levels of the channel. Now, it could be between the wholesaler and the retailer. It could be between the retailer and the consumer. It could be between the manufacturer and the wholesaler, or the manufacturer and the retailer, but any of those basically are what they are. Multi-channel conflict can be the worst, because when this is the manufacturer has established two or more channels that sell in the same market, then you really have conflict. So an example, dual distribution is one of those concepts, and if we're in North Carolina, especially where furniture is made, this is one of those examples. Bassett Furniture, all right, just to come up with a name, generally sales through retail outlets, and they do a good job, but they also have a factory store. And the factory store is there for a couple of reasons. A lot of that has to do with the factory store, quite simply, is a way for them to test new models and see what consumer desire is and reduce the ambiguity of knowing how well those go. Now, as long as it stays in that little factory store, that's fine. But if they were to, like, say, open a company store down on 321 and compete between those mom and pops that are down there selling furniture, well, then a war is going to go on, okay? One of the reasons why is that, right now they can say, well, we're impartial to all of the other distributors out there. But once you open another store to compete against your own channels, your ability to say that you have impartiality is no longer valid. And so you've got to be real careful on this. I talked to you about Hewlett-Packard. To give you an idea of the difficulty we had, we went with Hewlett-Packard as a brand, and they were a good brand. We worked in Lafayette, Louisiana. Lafayette had a lot of engineering companies, and so those corporations bought a lot of high-speed plotters and computer systems, and so we were happy with HP. But what happened was HP corporate out in New Orleans started sending their executive salesperson to Lafayette to bid against me. The day that I finally had it at an end is when I was sitting outside a doctor's hospital in Lafayette, and there was the manufacturer's rep, excuse me, not the manufacturer's rep, but the rep for Hewlett Packard sitting right next to me, and he's bidding the same equipment I am for this office. So at that point, I was done. So let's talk. Remember I talked about the causes? Well, here they are listed, all right? Goal incompatibility. The manufacturer may want to have a rapid expanse through a low-price process. The dealers may prefer to work with high margins, and have a short-run profitability. This was one of those things that I talked about. I don't know if I've talked about this before, but Subway was so expansive, even though a franchise, I'm going to use this as an example, they had the desire to create the $5 footlong, and granted, they got a lot of sales, but the profits for the mom and pops that were selling Subway sandwiches were completely wiped out almost, because there was nothing left to make money off of. So that's an example. Unclear roles and rights. So HP, this is exactly what happened to me, would sell laptops to large accounts through their sales force, but me as a licensed dealer, I'm trying to sell those large amounts as well. And there was no territory boundaries. It created conflict, and we got out of the business, and Hewlett Packard has kind of bumped along, but they're not the leader that they once were. The next is differences in perception. Manufacturers may be optimistic about a short-term outlook. They want dealers to have a higher inventory. The dealers may be pessimistic. They don't want to carry too much. Just think about it how it is right now, okay? I mean, now some of those dealers are kicking themselves in the head and said, boy, I wish I had 2 more cases of toilet paper, all right? But those differences are enough, okay? The last is the intermediaries' dependence on the manufacturer. The fortune of the dealers are profoundly affected by how well the manufacturers are doing. Think of those poor, okay? Think of those poor individuals who were dealerships for Chrysler, who lost their entire, 3 generations of Chrysler dealerships. And when they did the bailout of 2009, basically it was some government official deciding which one of the dealerships was going to stay in business, okay? And that's one of the difficulties when a reseller or a retailer basically marries in to a particular brand. Okay? So, I want to just briefly touch on not all of these, but to me, the 3 that are the most important here. Okay? Now, without having said that, let me also say that the way that you manage conflict is that you institutionalize it, all right? You accept that conflict is a natural occurrence between individuals, and you create a system so that conflict can be managed and justified. Because guess what, folks? Conflict can be good. Conflict changes things. Conflict allows us in a winner-take-all system sometimes to come up with the best idea. It can be hurtful and it can be painful, but if it's done in the right way, conflict can initiate change that we all need, okay? So, one of the ways, and now that I'm thinking about it, I want you to see this one I'm circling, employee exchange. One of the ways that you can stop conflict between channel members is that you exchange employees. The largest outlet for Procter & Gamble, other than their headquarters in Ohio, is in Bentonville, Arkansas, and it is inside the Walmart. There are about 200 P&G employees that basically work inside of Walmart. By the very same token, the next largest office for Walmart is in Ohio, inside the Procter & Gamble. It is one of those ways that it can be useful for cross-pollinating ideas to each other, and it helps the other side grow to an appreciation of what it is to do your job. It's really probably the best one. All right? Now, let's talk about this one right down here. the difference between diplomacy, mediation, and arbitration. These are when there are such, conflicts that they cannot be resolved, all right? When conflict is chronic or acute, the parties may need to resort to stronger means, okay? Diplomacy is when each side sends a person to meet with their counterpart and resolve a conflict. Sometimes there is a third party there, sometimes there's not, okay? Usually, though, diplomacy means that it is two individuals, or that's representatives from each group, and they try to find a resolution of the conflict. Generally, the way the resolution succeeds is if the one side can appreciate or understand what the other side is going through. Mediation is when there is a neutral third party that is skilled in conciliating those interests between the two parties, but the two parties have to come up with a way of coming up with a deal. Arbitration basically means that a third party listens to both sides and the third party makes the decision. All right? Now, there are some industries, like the ones that are strategic and important, that have compulsory third-party arbitration, which means that because you can't have them go out of business, they will have a judge who will make a decision and make a choice. Okay? Just a side note, when the baseball strike of 1992 came around, the players lost miserably. All right, and it always is that way. I mean, basically the owners always get a chance to look nice and be able to say, well, we want to open our gates, but they don't want to play. All they want to have is more money. And of course, for the average consumer that hears that, they can't understand it. Well, what happened finally is after losing 100 days in the baseball season, Marvin Miller asked for just one thing. And that was when there was a failure to come together with salaries, that either side could request third-party arbitration. That was the one thing that they got in order to open the season up. Now, how does that work out? Well, right after soccer players, baseball players are the highest paid athletes in the world, okay? I think the average salary is something like 3.6. Now, there are a lot of players that are making a lot less. But what it meant was immediately is that players started going into third-party arbitration, and bang, started getting 3 times, 4 times the amount that they had before. Because baseball players were in an indentured system in which they could not choose wherever they wanted to go. Free agency lit the fire in the 70s. Third-party arbitration really set them free. Well, just, threw a can of gasoline on the fire, okay? Now, what's happened in the last decade, however, is that it's finally come to the other side of the owners, and now owners are automatically going into third-party arbitration. But basically, if they found a way of making it work, there's been no work stoppage except now, and it has been very, very successful, okay? Now, the last kind of things to talk about before we go on, and those of you who are doing the still, take note, and to an offside the swatch, is the danger of dilution and cannibalization in the brand by putting your goods through inappropriate channels, all right? And you have to really think this one kind of through. You got to be careful that because you're not in the channel that uses your particular product to the maximum, that in essence what you could do is that you could royally mess everything up and no longer have the value that it has. If any of you are taking the steel case, I want you to, let's see. I can't remember if they talk about Husqvarna in there, but maybe I'll talk about it later. Well, I just said a lot, didn't I? Anyway, so the last thing to realize is that the difficulty with having exclusive dealerships is that there are legal and ethical issues. You must bound them to those particular territories, and realize, however, that whatever territories aren't out there, it is fair game. All right. Okay, folks, we have finished with the second to the last chapter, and the next chapter I'm going to bring up is, ironically, the one that everyone thinks that marketing actually is, and this is the concept of IMC, Integrated Marketing Communication. So, I'm sure I went far too long. You probably heard way too much from me, but thanks for bearing with me while I talk on my favorite subject. Have a great afternoon, folks. Bye.